Alright, in this video I want to show you guys how to get better tones when you're trying to silently record your tube amp with a Loadbox. So, a couple of things that you will need obviously are a tube amp and a Loadbox. I'm using the Fractal X-Load. We'll go over some of the specifics of that in a second, and obviously an interface to get into your computer and some kind of DAW. I'm using Pro Tools, and essentially the idea is going to be this. You know, you've got your normal setup that you would use with a mic'd cabinet, but we're going to be replacing the cabinet and the microphone with a Loadbox, because you can't just simply plug a tube amp into a mixing board or anything. You will cause a lot of damage. These things put out some insane voltage out of those transformers, so that's not a good idea. So you need something which can load the amp down safely. In this case, like I said, the X-Load, you've got stuff like the 2-note stuff, the Weber, Mini-Mass and things like that. There's a whole range of products now which cater to this area of the guitar market. And then once you're in your DAW, you'll need to load up an impulse response. So if you don't know what an impulse response is, essentially what it is doing, using some mathematics called Fourier analysis, or Fourier depending on where you're from, although he was a French guy, so I'm going to go with Fourier, which essentially is fancy math. And I hate saying fancy math because I'm a mathematician as well, but trust me, this stuff is really cool when you learn about it, and it's highly accurate. And what it does is it captures the sound of the cabinet, the microphone, and any downstream stuff from that we would be using, so that we can simply load up a file in our DAW and use it together with our amp and Loadbox to get a record-ready guitar sound. So let's have a look at some of the specifics. Then I want to show you guys basically what you're going to experience when you set this stuff up, and how to dial it all in a little bit better. The X-Load's cool because it features this voicing switch, which essentially changes the low resonant frequency. When an amplifier and a speaker cabinet interact, you have essentially a low resonance happening between the cabinet, which is determined by the type of speakers, as well as the dimensions and build of the cabinet, and the output section of the amplifier. So one of the reasons I went with the X-Load was we can swap between a UK voicing, which is at around 100 Hz, or a US voicing, which is lower at about 70 Hz. So if you were going for sort of like a vintage Fender kind of thing, you would want to use the US setting, or if you were going for more of a kind of modern sound, or you're going for like a Marshall Plexi or something, you'd use the UK setting. So this is the only Loadbox that I know of that imitates that, and essentially all they're doing is imitating the response curves of different speaker types. So this would probably be like greenbacks, and this would probably be like some kind of Eminence or Jensen speaker on a Fender. So that is what's happening on the front panel here, and of course we have a DI level, a big knob to remember what is going on there. And then on the back, if we turn it around, we've got our connections. So on this one, I'm using phantom power from my interface to, well, let's get that focus back, shall we, somehow. I'm using phantom power to power this load. You can use it as a passive Loadbox, but it will be an unbalanced output. So doing it this way is just going to give you like a cleaner kind of sound. And of course, the speaker in from your amp, make sure you plug it into amp in and nowhere else so you don't blow your amp up. So the connection's fairly straightforward. Then we're going over here straight into my Apollo Twin interface. I'm going into input number 1, and using the Apollo software, I'm sending phantom power to the X-Load. So the setup is pretty easy once you get out of your amp. Okay, so if you've got everything set up and you don't have an IR loaded, this is what it's going to sound like. It's pretty much the worst guitar sound you've ever heard in your life. By the way, I'm pre-boosting my Recto with this Anarchy Audio Workhorse, basically just to tighten up the low end. This is the sound with no IR. And then the same thing when magically I add an IR in post. So there you go, that sounds a whole lot better. That's pretty hissy, that's the only thing, so I'll turn that off. I don't want this video to be about how to dial your amp in, but now that we've captured those sounds, let's go over and have a look in the DAW and what you can do to basically make that sound a little more kind of mix ready, and what you would do in the studio, I guess. And essentially this translates to a pretty great recorded guitar sound, and in most cases you can get the same sort of results out of a Loadbox and an IR as you can by miking a real cab when you're using it in a mix. So let's have a look at a couple little things we can do to further tweak that out. Okay, let's jump into the DAW and have a look at what I'm doing. I'm loading up some IRs using Fractal Audio's CabLab, but because I'm on Pro Tools and because CabLab is a VST, I'm using this wrapper by Blue Cat Audio called Patchworks. Now, Patchworks is pretty amazing because it will let you use VSTs in Pro Tools for one, which is really easy. But you can see on the layout, you can have a chain of different VSTs before a parallel chain and then a bunch of post stuff. So it's like being able to organize all your VSTs into a rack, which is pretty cool. But for now, I'm just using it to load up some IRs in CabLab. And you can see here, these are two IRs that I made, one of a 57 and one of a 121 on a Marshall cab with vintage 30s. And what I really like about this is you can see the frequency response of the IR. So you can see with the 57, it's somewhere around 3K and probably somewhere around like 5 to 7K maybe. There's some pretty big peaks. And with the 121 impulse, this one has a huge amount of low end and a big dip in the mid. So when you blend both of them together in like a 1-to-1 ratio, you get that. I normally like to blend the 121 in a little bit like that, just to sort of act as a balancing factor. So understanding your mics and understanding your speaker choice and understanding how different IRs or microphones work together is really important. So let's have a listen to one of those clips, and what I will do, I'll just loop this initial one. We'll have a listen to it with just the 57 IR and then with just the 121 IR, and then both of them blended together. It's pretty cool. And that's my favorite mic combination there. You can hear why the 121 essentially complements the 57 really nicely because it's a darker sounding microphone even though it's on the same speaker. So there is how I like to set up the IRs. Again, this is for like filthy metal guitars, so V30s work really well, but the important thing is to try to think, okay, cool, if I normally use, for example, my amplifier with like a greenback with a Cascade Fathead on it, you might want to try to capture that impulse. And I've got some videos about that you can check out as well. All I would then do is add some post EQ to that. So we'll use this basic 6-band parametric. The first thing that I always do, add some high pass and add some low pass. So let's flick these on and then we'll set the low pass. There we go. I always get these the wrong way around. I remember saying to like a sound guy, like, "Oh, can you give me some, can you give me some like high pass or low pass?" And whatever the frequency I quoted, he was like, "Really?" And I was like, "I mean high cut and low cut. You get it." So yeah, I'd normally go about 8K for the high cut or the low pass, and about 80 for the high pass or the low cut, whatever you want to call it. This is the difference. So it's just taking out all the kind of like excess flubby low end that you don't need in a mix and taking out some of those harsh frequencies. One cool thing is if you sort of like use the IR loader, or in this case CabLab, already I can see that there's going to be some sort of spiky high mids to highs. So what I like to do, and there's a tutorial by Hardcore Music Studio that I totally stole this from, so go and watch his videos because he does a much better job of this than I do, talking about EQ on metal guitars. Basically, pick a frequency band, crank the Q right up, and what we're going to do with this one is I'm going to play the clip back, I'm going to sweep through the mids and high mids and basically just try to find where those harsh frequencies are. We get this. Okay, technical difficulties, sorry about that. Once you've got that frequency isolated, then keep it, you can make the Q a little bit wider. On this, I'd probably take it to about 50 and just pull out about 3 dB. And we can do the same thing. There's normally something around like 5, 6K. which is pretty sweet. So that just pulls out those harsh frequencies. Again, if you're looking to get this mix ready, you know, an engineer or a mix engineer is going to smash this with like EQs like Pultex or, you know, a channel strip or something. So any of those harsh frequencies, if you're doing any boosting, they're really going to get amplified, and, you know, the guitars are going to sound harsh. In this case, you pull them out before you do any of that, which is really handy. So let's have a listen to that. This is basically it. You know, I might add a little bit of reverb in post just for a kind of roomy sound, or you could go and add in a room IR using a convolution reverb or something. But for just a kind of straight up mix ready guitar tone, this sort of does the trick for metal anyway. So let's have a listen to that one, and I'll just flick between the EQ in and out. And there you go. It is way better with it in. It takes out all those kind of icky frequencies without affecting the overall tonality too much, which is what we want. We don't want these like gigantic EQ scoops. I always think that if you're doing that, try to get your tones nailed and print them like that, rather than having to rely on doing a whole bunch of EQing later. As I said, though, go and watch that Hardcore Music Studio tutorial, because he does a much better job of this than I do. So whether you're playing metal or whether you're playing other styles, hopefully this will help you get better tones with your Loadbox and your tube amp, and it's a great way to be able to do silent recording just about anywhere in the world. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you dig it, hit subscribe, and I will see you all around very soon. Cheers.